The screech of a crow jarred Aris awake. His eyes snapped open, pupils already adjusted to the dim light of his cramped apartment. The ceiling bore the same crack he'd memorized over 50 renditions, a hairline fissure that spiderwebbed from the corner to the light fixture. His hand instinctively went to his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart. Still human. Still alive. Monday. The sky would crack at noon. He didn't waste time on disbelief or the hollow ache of déjà vu. His body moved on autopilot, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards creaked in the same pattern as always, third board from the left, the one with the loose nail. He dressed quickly, a weathered leather jacket, reinforced hiking boots, and a utility belt he'd spent 20 loops perfecting. His pre-packed bag sat by the door, exactly where he'd left it the night before. He knew its contents by weight: 7 MREs, 2 liters of water, a compact medkit, a multi-tool, and 3 flares. The apartment's clock read 7:47 a.m. 4 hours and 13 minutes before the world truly ended, though most people wouldn't notice until the scream started. Aris slung the bag over his shoulder and paused at the door, listening. On the other side, a faint shuffle, the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, probably heading to the bathroom. She'd be dead by 3 p.m., torn apart by a mutating dog in the hallway. In earlier loops, he tried to save her. It never worked. The dog always came. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed, flickering occasionally. The building still smelled of stale coffee and cleaning solution, unaware of the horrors soon to be painted onto its walls. Aris moved swiftly but silently, avoiding the third step from the top on the staircase, it always creaked, and slipping out the emergency exit. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint metallic tang that would thicken to a choking fog by sunset. The streets were quiet, save for a few early risers walking dogs or jogging. Aris noted their positions file-like in his memory, the jogger with the red headphones, the old man reading a newspaper on a bench. In 12 hours, they'd be unrecognizable. His destination was the abandoned subway entrance 3 blocks east. In earlier loops, he'd wasted precious minutes fighting through the initial outbreak on the main streets. But Loop 9 had taught him the subway system, a maze of forgotten tunnels that connected to a hidden stash he'd seeded in Loop 17. A high-grade survival kit, a secret zone map, and a rare serum that would stabilize his first mutation. He jogged at a steady pace, weaving through alleys and backlots. Cars sat parked, their owners blissfully unaware. At a corner convenience store, a clerk unlocked the door, yawning. Aris resisted the temptation to warn him. Words were cheap in the apocalypse, and the loop had taught him to save energy for what mattered. 10 minutes later, he stood before the entrance to the East Side subway station. The sign hung crooked, one bolt rusted through. Below, stairs descended into darkness. A chain-link fence blocked the main entrance, but Aris knew the gap, third panel from the left, where the fence met the wall. He squeezed through, scraping his jacket, and padded down the stairs. The air grew cooler and damp. Graffiti covered the walls, faded tags from a forgotten era. He used his phone light, though the faint blue glow felt pathetic against the pressing darkness. The tunnels branched every 100 feet, but he'd memorized the path. Left at the collapsed pillar, straight through the old ticket booth, and down the maintenance shaft. His footsteps echoed. In the distance, a drip, 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 of water. Nothing alive, yet. The mutants preferred above-ground hunting, the tunnels were safer for now, but only until the initial panicked migration. Aris moved briskly, his heart rate controlled. Panic was a luxury he'd lost 49 loops ago. After 15 minutes, he arrived at a rusted door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The lock was simple, a relic from before the decay. He knelt, extracting a pick from his belt. The mechanism clicked open in under 10 seconds. He pushed the door inward, and a puff of stale dust greeted him. Behind the door lay a small room, stacked with old furniture. Aris navigated to the far corner, where a metal cabinet sat askew. He moved it aside, revealing a loose floorboard. His fingers found the edges, and he pried it off. Beneath lay a waterproof steel case, exactly where he'd buried it in Loop 17. He hefted it out and placed it on the ground. The latches were stiff, but yielded after a twist. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was a sleek survival kit, compact thermal blanket, water purification tablets, a fire starter, 8 nutrient bars, a machete-length blade. Beneath it, a folded map marked with zone danger ratings and safe houses he discovered through trial and error. And at the bottom, a syringe containing translucent amber liquid. The rare serum. Aris sighed, a brief release. The map would save him days, the serum would buy him critical time when his mutation began. With these, he could. A sudden cold crept through his left thumb. He glanced down, frowning. The digit had gone numb. He watched, frozen in disbelief, as the skin began to shimmer and soften, the flesh turning viscid, glowing with a soft white light. The thumb seemed to melt, the bone dissolving into a warm goo that dripped between his fingers. He dropped the serum container with a clatter, staring at his hand. The mutation. The first one of the loop. It always happened, but seeing it, feeling it, never lost its shock. The thumb now existed only as a slurry of glowing jelly, oozing down his palm. He had 30 seconds before it stabilized or caused serious damage. His mind raced through possibilities, acid resistance, detachable slime limb. He didn't have time to catalog. He had to act. He tore a strip from his undershirt and wrapped the oozing hand firmly, tying off the base of the thumb to slow the flow. Pain wasn't an issue, the nerve endings had likely dissolved. He scooped up the serum syringe, clutching it against his chest, and grabbed the survival kit. The map fluttered, but he snatched it, folding it hastily into his jacket. The damp in the tunnel felt suddenly oppressive. He backed out of the room, his injured hand held aloft, the trickle of goo pooling in the cloth. This was bad. Without proper stabilization, the gland-producing sac could spread, corrupting his whole hand into a pointless slime blob. He needed a safe location to inject the serum, and fast. But as he straightened, a voice cut through the tunnel shadows, a girl's voice, trembling and hoarse. "Please, help me. I'm not infected." Aris spun, his hand instinctively going to his machete. A figure emerged from a dark alcove, a girl, perhaps 17, with matted brown hair and a blood streak painting her face. She clutched a metal pipe, her arms shaking. But it wasn't her appearance that arrested him. It was what hung from a cord around her neck, a tarnished brass key, shaped like an antique doorknob, the first valve key, needed for the gas chamber in sewer M4. In 49 loops, he'd never found that key before loop day. The girl was an anomaly. She stared at his glowing hand, eyes widening. What are you?" Aris grimaced. The gluey substance dripped freely now. "Run," he said. "If you want to live, follow me. But don't ask questions." He shouldered past her, heading deeper into the sewer shaft. The key, he needed that key. But first, he needed to survive his own insidious body. The bandage was a poor solution, but it was all Aris had. His left thumb had turned into a semi-translucent, glowing goo that dripped onto the floor with every movement. He wrapped it tightly, feeling the strange substance pulse against the fabric. It was warm, almost alive. He cursed under his breath. 50 loops of meticulous planning, and this is what the system gave him. A thumb that melted into a puddle. He flexed his hand, and the goo stretched like taffy, then snapped back. Useless. Maybe not entirely, he could use it to create sticky traps or something, but right now, it was just an inconvenience. He moved through the ruined streets, stepping over debris and the occasional corpse. The city was silent, save for the distant howls of mutants. He knew the sound. They were still gathering, still feeding on the chaos of the first wave. In a few hours, the streets would be swarming, but for now, he had a window. The sewer M4 entrance was 3 blocks away, hidden beneath a collapsed overpass. He'd used it in loop 34, loop 41, and loop 49. Each time, the third valve key had been there, tucked inside a rusted locker behind a false wall. It was the only way to bypass the gas chamber, and he needed it badly. His boots crunched on broken glass as he crossed an intersection. The sun was high, casting harsh shadows across the desolate landscape. He could smell smoke, somewhere, a building was burning. He ignored it. Focus. The key was everything. Without it, he'd have to take the long way through the sewer, which meant more time, more risks, and more chances for his body to betray him. His ribs had started to ache. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the bones shift beneath his skin. Not yet. Please, not yet. He couldn't afford another mutation in the middle of a fight. He reached the overpass. The concrete slab had collapsed at an angle, creating a narrow gap leading down into darkness. He stopped, listening. No sounds from below. Good. He crouched, pulling a flashlight from his pack, and shone it into the hole. The beam sliced through the gloom, revealing a short drop into a dry drainage channel. He jumped, landing softly, the goo thumb absorbing the impact with a sickening squelch. He grimaced and moved forward. The drainage channel led to a metal grate, already pried open from a previous loop. He slipped through, his pack scraping against the rusted edges. The tunnel beyond was dark and narrow, the walls slick with moisture. He walked for about 50 meters, counting his steps, until he reached a junction. Left led to the main sewer line. Right led to a dead end with the hidden locker. He turned right. The dead end was exactly as he remembered, a blank concrete wall, covered in old graffiti. But he knew the trick. He pressed on the third brick from the top, and the wall slid open with a grinding noise, revealing a small chamber. Inside, a metal locker stood against the back wall, its door hanging open. He stepped inside, his heart sinking. The locker was empty. He stood there, staring at the hollow space. The key was always there. Always. He had never once found it missing. He checked the corners of the chamber, the floor, even the ceiling. Nothing. The key was gone. A sound behind him made him spin around. A figure stood at the entrance of the chamber, silhouetted against the dim light from the tunnel. It was a girl. She was drenched in blood, her clothes, her hair, her face. She held a small metallic object in her hand, and even from here, he could see it was the key. The third valve key. She stepped forward, and the light caught her features. She was young, maybe 17, with sharp eyes that seemed too old for her face. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. "You're the one who resets," she said, her voice steady despite the blood. Aris froze. No one had ever figured that out before. He'd been careful, always careful. But this girl, she knew. He tried to bluff. "I don't know what you're talking about." She shook her head. "Don't lie. I saw you at the stash. You took the serum and the map. You knew exactly where they were. No normal survivor does that." He studied her. There was something about her, something familiar. He searched his memories of past loops, but she didn't match any survivor he'd seen. She was new. A variable. He hated variables. "You have the key," he said, stating the obvious. "Yes. And you have knowledge. I've been watching you since the outbreak. You move like you've done this before. You avoid danger like you know where it is. I need you to teach me how to survive." He laughed, a hollow sound in the small chamber. "Teach you? I don't have time to babysit." "Then you don't get the key," she said, holding it up. "I'll destroy it before I let you take it. I know what's in that gas chamber. I've seen the bodies." He believed her. There was a hardness in her eyes that spoke of experience beyond her years. She wasn't bluffing. He sighed, running his good hand through his hair. "Fine. Deal. You give me the key, and I'll teach you what I know. But we do this my way. No questions, no hesitation." She nodded, tossing the key to him. He caught it with his right hand, feeling the cold metal against his palm. It was real. He tucked it into a secure pocket on his vest. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mira." "All right, Mira. Follow me. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't touch anything." He led her out of the chamber and back to the junction, this time taking the left tunnel into the main sewer line. The air grew thick and rank, the smell of decay and sewage overwhelming. He pulled a filter mask from his pack and handed her one. She put it on without complaint. The tunnel opened into a large chamber, the ceiling high above, with catwalks rusting on the walls. Pipes of various sizes crisscrossed overhead, some dripping with discolored liquid. He knew this room. It was the first major obstacle of Sewer M4, a pit filled with a corrosive substance that would eat through anything in seconds. The solution was a series of narrow beams barely visible above the surface. He'd memorized the path. "Stay exactly where I step," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. He moved forward, placing his feet carefully on the first beam. It held. He took another step, then another, his body balanced and precise. Mira followed, her footsteps light, copying his movements perfectly. He was impressed, she had good instincts. They made it across without incident. He led her through a series of tunnels, avoiding the nests of sleeping mutants by taking detours he knew from previous loops. At one point, they had to crawl through a narrow pipe to bypass a collapsed section. His ribcage protested, the bones grinding against each other, and he felt a sharp pain in his left side. He gritted his teeth and pushed on. They reached a large junction with 3 paths. The left path led to the gas chamber. The middle path led to a dead end with a loot cache. The right path led to the core, where the boss, the fusion of failed loopers, lay dormant. He needed to go left, but first, he wanted to check the loot cache. It had valuable resources, including a spare mutation stabilizer that might keep his ribs from becoming a blender. "We're going to the middle," he said. "But the key is for the gas chamber. Shouldn't we go left? Trust me. There's something I need." He led her down the middle path, which opened into a small, dry room. There, on a raised platform, was a metal case. He opened it, finding a first aid kit, a few ration bars, and a small injector with a blue liquid. The stabilizer. He pocketed it, relief washing over him. As he turned to leave, he felt a sharp lurch in his chest. His ribs were moving, literally shifting under his skin. He gasped, doubling over. Mira rushed to his side. "What's wrong?" "Mutation," he wheezed. "My ribs, they're changing." He could feel the bones flattening, fusing together, forming a solid plate. The pain was intense, but it subsided after a few seconds, leaving him breathless. He straightened up, gingerly touching his chest. It was hard, like a shell. He stripped off his shirt, exposing his torso. Where his ribcage had been, there was now a smooth, bone-white surface with a single seam running down the middle. He tried to flex, and the seam split open, revealing a set of spinning blades inside. His ribcage had turned into a blender. Mira stared, her eyes wide. What is that?" "My ribs decided to become kitchen appliances," he said, pulling his shirt back on. "Don't ask." He grabbed the stabilizer and injected it into his arm. The blue liquid spread through his veins, and he felt a temporary calm. The mutation would hold for now, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the next one hit. "We need to move," he said. "The gas chamber is next." They backtracked to the junction and took the left path. The tunnel sloped downward, and the air grew colder. They reached a massive metal door, bolted shut. In the center was a keyhole. He inserted the third valve key and turned. The door groaned open, revealing a long, narrow chamber filled with gas canisters mounted on the walls. The floor was covered in a fine white powder, the residue of previous victims. He knew the trick. The gas was triggered by pressure sensors. He had to cross without stepping on the wrong tiles. He pulled out a small device from his pack, a sensor jammer, and activated it. The lights on the canisters flickered and died. The system was offline. "Stay behind me," he said. He walked across the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Mira followed, her hand brushing against his back. They reached the far end, where another door awaited. He pushed it open, and they stepped into the core chamber. The room was vast, a cathedral of concrete and steel. In the center, a mass of flesh and metal pulsated, a grotesque fusion of human limbs and machinery. It was the boss, the amalgamation of failed loopers, their bodies merged into a single, writhing entity. It had multiple arms, each ending in a different weapon, a drill, a chainsaw, a flamethrower. Its face was a patchwork of mouths and eyes, all screaming silently. It had been waiting. Aris knew the pattern. It would attack in 3 phases. First, it would use its ranged weapons. Then, it would charge. Finally, it would self-destruct if its health dropped too low. He had to overload its energy core before that happened. "Stay here," he told Mira. "Keep your distance." He moved forward, drawing his only weapon, a combat knife from his boot. It was laughable against such a beast, but he didn't need to kill it. He just needed to reach the core, located in the center of its chest. The boss roared, a sound that shook the walls. It raised its drill arm and slammed it down, where Aris had been standing a second before. He dodged, rolling to the side, his mutation-riddled body protesting. He felt his thumb drip goo, leaving a trail on the floor. He sprinted, zigzagging as the boss fired a stream of flame. The heat singed his back. He dove, sliding under a swing from the chainsaw arm, and came up right in front of the core. It was a pulsing orb of energy, protected by a layer of mutant flesh. He stabbed it with the knife, but it barely scratched. He needed more power. He looked at his left arm, the one with the goo thumb. He remembered the railgun eyeball, that was on his other eye. But he had one more mutation, his right hand had developed a small gland that secreted an acidic goo. He hadn't used it yet, but now was the time. He pressed his palm against the core, forcing the gland to release. Acid bubbled, eating into the flesh. The boss screamed, its body convulsing. The core began to glow brighter, unstable. But it wasn't enough. He needed to overload it completely. He made a split-second decision. He jammed his left hand into the gap, the goo thumb dissolving into raw energy, feeding the core. The glow intensified, and the boss thrashed wildly. He felt his arm being crushed, the bones snapping, but he held on. "Get back," he shouted to Mira. The core exploded with a blinding light. The shockwave threw him across the room, and he landed hard, his vision swimming. The boss disintegrated into a shower of ash. The ceiling cracked, debris falling. Mira ran to him, pulling him up. "We have to leave. The whole place is collapsing." He couldn't feel his left arm. He looked down, it was gone from the elbow down, the stump cauterized by the explosion. He groaned, staggering to his feet. They ran, following the path he had memorized, dodging falling rocks and rising water from burst pipes. They burst out of a maintenance hatch into the open air, collapsing on the ground, coughing and gasping. The sewer behind them groaned and settled, but it held. Aris lay on his back, staring at the sky. His body was a wreck, one eye had turned into a railgun, his ribs were a blender, his thumb was goo, his arm was missing. And he felt another mutation coming, a tingling in his spine. Mira sat beside him, her face pale. "What now?" He managed a weak smile. "Now we go to the top district. And we finish this." But inside, he was terrified. The next level up could kill him. Or it could turn him into something even more monstrous. He didn't know which was worse. The air in sewer M4 was thick and putrid, a cocktail of decay and untreated waste that clung to Aris's nostrils like a vice. He pressed his back against the slimy wall, his railgun eyeball swiveling to scan the darkness ahead. The tunnel stretched into an abyss, punctuated only by the occasional drip and the skittering of tiny claws. Beside him, Mira breathed slowly, her grip on a rusty pipe tight. She had refused a gun, claiming she didn't trust weapons that could jam. Instead, she had pulled a length of rebar from a collapsed grate, a makeshift spear that she handled with surprising ease. "We're about 100 meters from the first trap," Aris said, his voice low. "A pressure plate triggers a ceiling spray of acid. Loop 31 taught me that the hard way." Mira's eyes, still flecked with dried blood from earlier, narrowed. "You remember every loop?" 50 of them. Every death, every mistake." He touched his left shoulder, where the stump of his lost forearm throbbed under a bandage. The missing limb was a fresh wound, but his mind was already cataloging every hazard ahead. "This section is infested with mutated rats. Small, fast, but they swarm. The acid trap can thin them out if we trigger it right." He led her forward, his bare feet squelching through shallow water. Every step echoed, and the darkness seemed to press in. His right hand, still human, traced the wall, feeling for a loose brick, the telltale sign of the pressure plate. His left wrist ended in a neatly wrapped stump, courtesy of the explosion that had bought them passage earlier. The pain was a dull throb, but he had learned to compartmentalize. Pain was just data. "Here," he whispered, stopping. "The plate is about 2 meters ahead, disguised as a normal grate. I need you to stand on that dry patch near the outflow pipe." He pointed to a sliver of concrete just above the waterline. Mira moved without question, her bare feet silent. She had shed her shoes hours ago claiming the soles were too loud. Now she stood poised, her rebar ready. Aris knelt and pried up a chunk of rusted metal from the wall, revealing a cavity. Inside was a small, sealed canister, a remnant from Loop 31's previous resident, a scavenger who had died to the acid before Aris could warn him. He pried off the lid and extracted a handful of magnesium flares. "What are those?" Mira asked. "Attractants. The rats are drawn to light and heat." He shook out a flare and struck it. The bright white light hissed to life, casting dancing shadows. "When I toss this onto the plate, the acid will spray. But the rats will be blinded for a few seconds. We run straight ahead, don't stop, don't look back." He wound up and threw the flare. It clattered on the grate, rolling to a stop at the center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the grate sagged under the slight weight, and a fine mist erupted from the ceiling. The mist shimmered with a sickly green glow as it coalesced into droplets that rained down, sizzling where they landed. The concrete bubbled and smoked. From the tunnels ahead, a chittering rose, the rats, attracted by the noise. "Now!" Aris hissed. They sprinted. The water splashed underfoot as they cleared the acid zone, the droplets falling behind them. Aris's railgun eyeball tracked the ceiling, ready to blast any rat that dropped on them. Mira's rebar was a whirlwind of defensive jabs. They rounded a corner just as the first wave of rats, dozens of tiny red eyes and glistening teeth, poured into the acid zone. The mist caught them mid-leap, and they squealed in agony as their flesh dissolved. The chittering became a cacophony of pain, but Aris didn't slow. "There's a choke point ahead," he gasped. "A collapsed pipe leads to the core. But we have to cross a grated bridge over a pit. The grating is weak in the middle." They reached the bridge. It spanned a pit that seemed bottomless, the sound of rushing water echoing from below. The grate was rusted, with visible gaps. Aris recalled Loop 32, when he had stepped on the weak point and plunged into the waste water, only to be consumed by a tentacle-mouthed mutant that nested below. He had died screaming. "I'll go first," he said. "Step where I step." He placed his right foot on the leftmost edge, feeling the metal groan. He moved sideways, keeping his weight distributed. Mira followed, her movements fluid, stepping precisely in his footprints. Halfway across, the grate trembled. A chunk of metal snapped from the far end and plunged into the darkness, followed by a splash and a guttural roar from below. "Don't look down," Aris said, but his own railgun eye was already scanning the depths. A creature with multiple tentacles was writhing in the water, drawn by their presence. He forced himself to focus on the path. They made it to the other side, the grate groaning but holding. Aris let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was close. Then his body decided to remind him of its ticking nature. A spasm ran through his ribcage. He gasped and clutched his chest as the bones beneath his skin shifted, warped, and pressed outward. The pain was excruciating, like being stretched from the inside. Mira's eyes widened. "Aris. Mutation," he gritted out. "My ribs." He tore his shirt open. The left side of his ribcage was no longer a smooth curve of bone. Instead, individual ribs had extended outward, flattening into serrated blades that poked through the skin. They were sharp, glistening with a faint metallic sheen, and they moved with his breathing, sliding against each other like a set of scissors. Blood trickled down his side. "Get something to wrap them," he said, trying to stay calm. "I can't let them." He stumbled back as Mira lunged forward with a piece of torn fabric, a piece of her own sleeve. She quickly wrapped the protruding blades, creating a makeshift bandage that pressed them against his torso. The pressure hurt, but it prevented the blades from slashing outward. "That's not permanent," she said. "Nothing is permanent. They'll stabilize in a few hours." He took a steadying breath, then another. The pain receded to a dull ache. "Thanks. You saved me from the rats. We're even." They continued. The tunnel curved, and the ambient light began to shift from the sewer's own phosphorescent fungi to a sickly orange glow that pulsed from ahead. The core. Aris's mind raced through the loops. The boss was a fusion of failed loopers, a grotesque amalgamation of malformed limbs and technology, held together by a volatile energy core. He had sacrificed his left arm to overload it in Chapter 2, but that was hours ago in story time. The explosion had bought them time, but the core hadn't been destroyed, only disrupted. The boss would be regenerating even now. We need to find an alternate route, he muttered. The direct path leads to the boss's chamber. It's too risky while my mutations are unstable. You still know the way? Mira asked. I've memorized every passage in this sewer. There's a maintenance ladder that leads up to a lower district tunnel. It connects to a refrigeration unit from an old grocery store. From there, we can bypass the boss entirely. They reached a fork. 2 tunnels branched off, one lightless and narrow, the other wider and lined with cables. This one, Aris said, pointing to the narrow tunnel. His railgun eyeball confirmed it, the path was clear of traps except for a tripwire near the end. But as he took a step forward, a deep rumbling echoed from behind them. The ground trembled, and dust showered from the ceiling. Something massive was approaching from the direction they had come. What is that? Mira hissed. It might be the boss. It might be something worse. Aris turned to face the approaching sound, his heart pounding. His railgun aimed down the tunnel, but he couldn't see anything yet, only a growing shadow that swallowed the phosphorescent glow. We have to move. Now. They plunged into the narrow tunnel. Aris's ribs scraped the rough walls, sending fresh waves of pain through his torso. His bandages snagged on a protruding rock, and he tore them free with a curse. The blades were exposed again, but he didn't have time to rewrap them. Behind them, the rumbling grew louder, punctuated by the crash of collapsing walls. Faster. Mira urged. They reached the tripwire. Aris vaulted over it, his body contorting in midair. Mira followed, clearing it with a slide. A few seconds later, a massive clawed hand smashed through the ceiling behind them, spraying concrete and rebar. A roar shook the tunnel, so loud it seemed to resonate in his bones. Aris stumbled but kept going. The narrow tunnel ended in a ladder leading up. There, he yelled. Mira reached the bottom rung and started climbing. Aris followed, his wounded body screaming. Above them sat a rusted hatch. Mira shoved it open, revealing a concrete room lined with pipes and a massive refrigeration unit. They tumbled out, and Aris slammed the hatch shut, securing it with a bar he found on the floor. The roar echoed upward, muffled by the thick metal, and the ground stopped shaking. We're safe, Aris breathed. For now. He collapsed against the wall, his mutations making each breath a deliberate effort. The ribs had settled into their new shape, serrated blades that would be useful in a fight but a liability in close quarters. He would need to adapt. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of rest, his railgun eye watching as Mira inspected their new surroundings. Where are we? She asked. Lower district building. Abandoned. From here, we can reach the top district by traversing the skybridge in the high-rise next door. He closed his good eye, briefly letting exhaustion take hold. But first, I need a moment to assess my next mutation. It's coming. His body didn't wait. The goo in his left thumb had been dormant for most of the sewer trek, but now it began to pulse, expanding and contracting like a beating heart. Aris watched with morbid curiosity as it transformed, slowly solidifying into a shape that looked almost like an eye, but with a crystalline lens. The color shifted from scar tissue to deep purple. What is it now? Mira asked, leaning close. Arificative crystal, Aris said. From my last gene memory. It might be harmless, or it might be a bomb. He smiled grimly. Only one way to find out. He poked it with his right hand. The crystal flared, emitting a bright flash that seared an afterimage into his retinas. When his vision cleared, he saw that the crystal had projected a hologram, a map of the surrounding city grid, with a blinking dot marking their location. Handy, he muttered. Maybe this loop won't be a complete disaster. Mira didn't respond. She was staring at the hatch they had come through, her strange power crackling at her fingertips. Something's following us. And not just the boss, there's another presence. Faint. Familiar. A cold knot tightened in Aris's stomach. He had felt it too, a ghost-like sensation brushing against his consciousness whenever he used his railgun eye. A fellow looper. Or something else? Or someone who broke the loop before and failed, Mira said. There are echoes in the waste, Aris. We're not the only ones repeating. He looked at his glowing new crystal thumb, then at the map it displayed. The path to the top district was clear, but the final boss awaited. And now, a new unknown threat was on their trail. Still, he was one level closer to breaking the loop, and his mutations, while terrifying, had never stopped him before. Iron keeps beating rust, he quoted from some long-dead philosopher. He pushed himself upright, ignoring the sharp bite of his serrated ribs. Let's move. Mira nodded, her grip on the rebar tightening. Together, they disappeared into the twisting corridors of the dead supermarket, the echoes of their footsteps mixing with the distant screech of something ancient and hungry. The tremors grew stronger, rumbling through the concrete like a giant's footsteps. Aris froze mid-stride, his hand instinctively reaching for Mira's sleeve to pull her back. The ground beneath them cracked, a fissure spreading from the far end of the tunnel. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the distant roar that accompanied the shaking sent a jolt of recognition through his spine. He had felt this before. In Loop 31, the same vibrations had preceded the appearance of a giant worm mutant, a creature that tunneled through the earth with terrifying speed, its maw lined with rows of jagged teeth. That loop had ended badly. His lung had mutated into jelly, and he'd suffocated under a pile of zombies after the worm had collapsed the tunnel on top of him. The memory was visceral, the sensation of his liquefied lungs sloshing in his chest, each breath a futile struggle against drowning in his own fluids. He had clawed at the rubble, but the weight was too much, and darkness had claimed him after minutes of agony. Aris's heart raced, but his mind snapped into focus. He'd learned to respect those memories, to use them as a map of doom. No, he thought, clenching his remaining right hand into a fist. Not this time. Mira stumbled next to him, her eyes wide with alarm. What is that? She whispered, clutching the reinforced backpack they'd salvaged from the abandoned building. Blood and grime smeared her face, but her gaze held a sharpness that belied her frail appearance. A giant worm. It's approaching from below. We need to move now. Aris grabbed her hand and bolted toward the fork in the tunnel they had been approaching. The left path was the dead end according to his knowledge, a collapsed sewer pipe that led nowhere. But that was exactly where they needed to go, because that dead end held a hidden ventilation shaft he'd discovered in Loop 44. Behind them, the roar intensified, and a geyser of concrete and pipe exploded upward as the worm burst through the floor. It was immense, its segmented body covered in chitinous armor that scraped against the tunnel walls with a horrible screech. Its head turned, a circular mouth full of spiraling teeth dripping with green acid. Left, go left. Aris shouted, pulling Mira down the narrower passage. The worm tunneled after them, faster than he'd anticipated. He ran a mental calculation, the worm's speed, their distance to the hidden shaft, the angle of attack. He needed to slow it down. Aris halted abruptly, planting his feet. He turned, facing the worm head-on. What are you doing? Mira yelled, but he ignored her. He aimed his left eye, the mutated one, at the creature's front segment. The railgun eye hummed, a torrent of energy surging through his socket. The sensation was cold and unnatural, like his own eye socket was an electrical circuit being overloaded. He focused, and a brilliant streak of blue light shot from his pupil, striking the worm's armor dead center. The creature let out a squeal that vibrated through his bones. The impact scorched a crater in its chitin, black smoke curling from the wound. The worm thrashed wildly, its momentum disrupted as it recoiled from the pain. That was enough. But as he turned to run, Aris felt a distinct heat building behind his right eye, the railgun's battery was overheating. The mutation had its limits, and firing it twice in quick succession risked an overload that could melt his orbital socket. He grimaced, forcing himself back into a sprint. Mira had stopped at the end of the path, where the tunnel dead-ended into a solid concrete wall. Her eyes darted across the surface with growing desperation. It's a dead end, Aris. There's nothing here. It's not a dead end, it's a secret, he panted, approaching the wall. He ran his left hand, the one with the aurificative crystal thumb, along the surface until he found the disguised seam. The crystal on his thumb glowed, and a holographic projection flickered to life, overlaying the wall with a schematic of the building above. There it was, a ventilation shaft that descended from an old air handling unit. His thumb could trace the delicate perimeter, and with extra focus, he commanded the crystal to amplify its vibrations. A section of the wall began to grind aside, revealing a narrow opening and a rusted metal ladder leading upward into darkness. "Climb," he urged Mira, pushing her toward the ladder. She needed no further prompting, scrambling upward with a speed that surprised him. The worm had recovered and was gaining ground, its body scraping against the narrowing tunnel. Aris could feel its heat and see the walls shake as it approached. He started climbing, his missing left forearm making the job painful. He had to hook his arm over the rungs while his right hand gripped tightly. Each pull sent agony through his ribs, but he forced himself higher. Giant jaws snapped at the space where his legs had been, and he yanked himself up just in time. The worm rammed into the ventilation shaft's entrance, too large to fit. It let out an anguished roar that rattled his teeth, then began to retreat, likely seeking easier prey. Half the way up, Aris paused, gasping for breath. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out thought. Mira had stopped a few rungs above him, peering down. "Are you okay?" "Fine, just, give me a second." He pulled himself together and continued the climb until they reached the top, where a heavy grate blocked the exit. Mira braced her legs against the walls and shoved it open with a metallic screech, letting in a stream of dim light. She scrambled out first, then reached down to help him through. They lay on a broad, flat landing, likely the roof of an industrial machinery shack, surrounded by the ruins of what had once been a subway maintenance yard. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and decay. Distantly, the creature's grumbling faded as it went deeper underground. Aris collapsed onto his back, staring at the gray-washed sky. Exhaustion and relief mixed into a dizzying haze. But the heat behind his right eye flared again, sharp and worrying. He pressed a hand to his eyelid, feeling the temperature spike. "Damn it!" he muttered. Mira crawled over to him, her face etched with concern. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "It's my eye. The railgun, it's overheating. I don't know if it's going to explode or just melt." He could feel the socket pulsing with heat, a furious throb that echoed through his skull. Her hands hovered near his face, hesitant. "Can you cool it down somehow? Water or metal?" He tried to think, but the pain was making it difficult. In previous loops, he'd learned that mutations had limits, the body could only sustain so much before it backfired. He had risked too much by using the railgun so quickly. "Everything has a price," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Above them, clouds rolled slowly across a dead sky. The city's silhouette loomed in the distance, the towers of the lower, middle, and top districts, each a tier of horror and human desperation. Their goal lay at the highest tier, past all the monsters and puzzles he'd memorized. But first, he had to deal with this eye of his. Mira sat beside him, silent for a long moment. "In my last life, if I can even call it that, I had a brother," she said softly. "He had a mutation in his arm. Every time he used it, the bone grew barbs that grew monstrous. One day, it just shattered. He bled out. I couldn't save him." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I found him because I could feel his memories leaking into mine, but by then it was too late." Aris turned his head to look at her. The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard, but he was too exhausted to mask his interest. "Was there an apocalypse, in your world too? Maybe not the same as this, but close enough." She gave a weak smile. "I don't remember the details. The memories I absorb are jumbled, sometimes incomprehensible. But I know this, I can feel your dozens of loops in your presence, like layers of cracked glass. It's overwhelming." "Great, so pinball of personal tragedy," he joked, despite the ache. "If I die here, how fast can you find a decent next guy to?" She smacked his shoulder. "Stop. You taught me that dead bodies don't teach survival, and you're not dying now. Hear me? I need that skull of yours to cross that bridge when we get there." Unbidden, a pained laugh escaped his lips, though it turned into a cough. "You're 1 in 5 loops. I've teamed with maybe once in 50. And that once was a disaster. So try to stay alive, okay?" He closed his eyes, letting the searing pain in his eye ebb with her calming presence. The heat still mounted, but he could feel it plateau, or was that just his sensory nerves giving up? Mira watched him, her hand extending to his blackened skin, but she didn't dare touch for fear of making it worse. We'll rest here for the night, she said, her eyes scanning for any descending threats. I remember some canned food we can salvage from the hydrant over there. You won't lose your sight on my watch. The sentence ended lamely, as if she, too, knew how fragile his condition was. As days bled into memory, one certainty remained, his crystalline thumb flickering schematic of the tower ahead, his rib cage piercing through the bandages, his phantom limb ache, his body at once trusty weapon and willing wreck. And above all, the final boss in the top district had waited long enough for his return. The alcove was small, barely large enough for two people to sit without touching. The walls were slimy with condensation, and the air smelled of rust and decay. Aris pressed his back against the cold stone, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The railgun I had cooled slightly, but the socket still throbbed with a dull heat, like a coal pressed against his skull. Mira knelt beside him, her movements deliberate as she unzipped a side pocket on her pack. From it, she produced a small tube of gel, the label long worn away. Hold still, she said, her voice low but firm. She squeezed a dollop of the translucent substance onto her fingers. It glistened in the dim light from the emergency chem stick Aris had cracked earlier. The gel was cool, almost cold, as she applied it around the rim of his eye socket. Aris flinched, his muscles tensing involuntarily, but he forced himself to stay still. The gel seeped into the inflamed tissue, numbing the burn. Where did you get that? Aris asked, his voice hoarse. Mira didn't look up. Salvaged it from a medical supply cache 3 loops ago. I don't remember which loop, they blend together after a while. But I found it useful for burns. She paused, her fingers lingering near his temple. You're lucky the eye didn't burst. I've seen that happen before. The pressure builds up, and then. She made a popping gesture with her free hand. Aris closed his good eye, focusing on the relief of the cooling gel. You've seen a lot. I've absorbed a lot, she corrected. I don't live through the loops like you do. I just pick up the pieces. Memories, feelings, skills. They float around me, especially near loopers. The stronger the looper, the more I can sense. She finished applying the gel and recapped the tube, stowing it back in her pack. You're the strongest I've ever encountered. It's like standing next to a bonfire. I can feel the heat of your past loops radiating off you. Aris opened his eye and looked at her. In the faint green glow, her face was pale, smudged with dirt and dried blood, not all of it her own. Her eyes, however, were sharp, intelligent. She was studying him with the same intensity he usually reserved for scanning threats. You said you can absorb fragments of memories, Aris said. What exactly does that mean? Mira sat back, crossing her legs. She seemed to consider the question, her gaze drifting to the floor. It's like pictures, mostly. Snapshots of places, people, events. Sometimes sounds, shouts, explosions, a woman screaming. Sometimes feelings, fear, rage, despair. I don't get the full story, just impressions. Like flipping through a book with half the pages torn out. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. I know you've been through this many times. I saw a flash of a city burning, a tower collapsing, a woman with red hair, your mother, maybe. And I saw you dying. Over and over. Different ways, but always the same end. Aris felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He didn't speak, but his silence was confirmation enough. I want to help you break the loop, Mira said. But I have conditions. Of course you do. Aris allowed a thin, humorless smile. Everyone wants something. My sister, Lyra. She's being held in the top district. The final boss, whatever it is, has her. I don't know why, but I can sense her there. She's alive, but barely. I need you to save her. Aris closed his eyes again, his mind racing through his 50 previous loops. He remembered the top district, the gleaming towers that once housed the elite, now transformed into a fortress of nightmares. The final boss was the core of the loop, a being of immense power, capable of resetting time whenever threatened. Aris had faced it twice before, and both times he had died within seconds. The third time, he had run. But that was before he had accumulated so many mutations, before his body had become an unstable arsenal. I've been to the top district, he said slowly. Twice. I didn't survive long either time. The boss is not something you can fight with conventional weapons. It requires a specific approach, a combination of actions and timing that I haven't fully figured out yet. But I know more than anyone else alive. Maybe enough. He opened his eyes and met Mira's gaze. If I help you save your sister, will you help me get to the boss? And if I fail, will you carry on my knowledge? Mira frowned. Carry on your. I can't guarantee I'll survive. But if I die, my memories might linger. You could absorb them. You'd know what I know. Then maybe you could try yourself. She stared at him for a long moment. You're asking me to become the next looper. I'm asking you to not let this all be for nothing. Aris's voice was quiet, but heavy with the weight of 50 lifetimes. I've been alone for so long, Mira. Having someone who understands, it changes things. But I'm not naive. Trust is earned. And we've only known each other for a few hours. A few hours, but we've been through a lot, she said. You saved my life. And I could have left you in that sewer. But I didn't. No. You didn't. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant drip of water and the occasional skittering of something in the tunnels below. Then Mira extended her hand. Alliance, she said. We help each other. You teach me survival, share your knowledge. I help you with my power and whatever else I can. And when we reach the top district, we save Lyra and take down the boss. Together. Aris took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin calloused. Together. They released hands, and Aris leaned back against the wall, letting out a long breath. The gel had done its work, the pain in his eye had subsided to a dull ache. He felt raw inside, the exposure of his secrets, the vulnerability of trust, but also lighter, as if some burden had been shared. Tell me more about the top district, Mira said. What's waiting for us? Aris thought for a moment, organizing his memories. The city is divided into 3 layers. The bottom district is what we're in now, slums, sewers, mutants. The middle district was for the working class, but it's been overrun by failed experiments, rogue AI systems, and traps left by the previous regime. The top district is the pinnacle, the seat of power before the apocalypse. It's a fortress. The air is thin up there, the temperature controlled by a failing climate system. And the boss. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It's not a single creature. It's a nexus of energy, a manifestation of the loop itself. It can warp reality, create illusions, and it feeds on the fear and memories of those who approach. It knows its enemies. It knows their past loops. Mira's eyes widened slightly. It can use your memories against you. Yes. It once showed me my mother dying, over and over, until I couldn't think straight. I walked into a trap and was impaled by a spire of glass. He said it flatly, as if reciting a weather report. How do you beat something like that? I'm still figuring that out. But I have theories. The boss is vulnerable during the moment it shifts between loops, when time resets. If I can time my attack precisely, I might be able to disrupt the transition and break the loop permanently. But it requires being in the right place at the exact moment, with the right kind of energy. The explosion in the sewer gave me an idea. My mutations, they're unpredictable, but they also produce unique energy signatures. If I can channel that energy. He stopped mid-sentence, a shudder running through his body. His left hand, the one with the crystalline thumb, began to glow faintly. The light pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. What's happening? Mira asked, alert. Aris grit his teeth. I'm about to level up. I've been holding it off, but the body can only delay so long. The next mutation is coming. Can you control it? No. It's completely random. It could be anything, a beneficial mutation, a useless one, or something that kills me outright. He looked at her, his eyes intense. Listen to me. If I turn into something dangerous, you need to get away. Don't try to help me. Just run. Mira shook her head. I'm not leaving you. Mira. I said no. Her voice was steel. We're partners now. We face this together. Whatever happens, I'll handle it. Aris wanted to argue, but the pressure building inside him made speech difficult. He could feel his cells shifting, rearranging, as if his body were being rewritten from within. The glow from his thumb intensified, spreading up his wrist. His veins became visible, pulsing with a sickly light. Then a new sound reached them, a chittering, scraping noise, like thousands of tiny claws on stone. Mira tensed, reaching for her weapon. Mutants, she whispered. Small ones. A lot of them. Aris forced himself to focus through the pain. They're attracted to the light. My mutation is drawing them. If I level up now, we might have a chance to fight them off, or I might become a liability. You can't hold it any longer. No. It's happening. He clenched his fists, his whole body trembling. I have to let it happen. But the moment I change, I might be disoriented. You'll need to protect us both. Mira stood, drawing a combat knife from her belt. It was a simple but sturdy blade, scavenged from a fallen soldier. I'll do what I can. The chittering grew louder. Dark shapes began to emerge from the tunnel entrance, mutant rats, the size of cats, with multiple eyes and razor-sharp teeth. But these were different from the ones they had faced earlier. These were smaller, more numerous, and they moved with a coordinated intelligence that suggested a hive mind. Aris groaned, his back arching as the mutation took hold. The crystallized thumb dissolved into a liquid that flowed up his arm, coating his skin in a thin, glassy layer. Then his forearm began to change, the bones cracked and reformed, the muscles twisted, and a new shape emerged, a blade, but alive, composed of crystalline bone and sinew, like a hummingbird's beak made of sharpened ice. The transformation completed just as the first wave of rats reached them. Aris opened his eyes, now glowing with a pale blue light. He looked at his new arm, the forearm was gone, replaced by a natural weapon, a razor-sharp extension of his body. It was beautiful and deadly. Mira, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, get behind me. She didn't hesitate. She stepped back, pressing herself against the wall. Aris raised his new arm, and the crystalline blade hummed with energy. He swung it in a wide arc, and the blade extended, slicing through the first rank of rats with ease. They fell, their bodies severed cleanly. But more came. They swarmed over the fallen, climbing over each other in their frenzy. Aris struck again and again, his movements fluid, as if he had trained with this weapon all his life. The blade sang through the air, leaving trails of blue light. Mira stabbed and slashed at any rat that got past his guard, her knife finding gaps in their armor. For a few desperate minutes, they fought in the cramped alcove. The chittering and squealing mixed with the wet sounds of cutting and the occasional grunt of exertion. Finally, the last rat fell, twitching, and a sudden silence descended. Aris stood in the center of a circle of corpses, his crystalline arm dripping with gore. The glow in his eyes faded, and he looked down at his new mutation with a mix of awe and resignation. Well, he said, it's better than a thumb that turns into jelly. Mira let out a shaky laugh. Is that a joke? Maybe. I'm not sure anymore. He flexed the blade, and it retracted slightly, forming a more compact shape. It seems to respond to my will. That's good. Can you still hold a weapon? Aris tried to grasp something with his new hand, but the blade made it impossible. No. I'll have to rely on this for offense. But it's strong. And fast. Mira sheathed her knife and began to gather supplies from the fallen rats, small pouches, a few scraps of metal. We should keep moving. The noise will attract bigger things. Aris nodded. The level up had stabilized, but he could feel the strain on his body. Each mutation came with a cost, energy, stability, sanity. He didn't know how much more he could take before his body became more alien than human. But for now, he was still in control. And he had an ally. Lead the way, he said. I'll cover our rear. Mira smiled, a rare, brief expression, and turned to navigate through the tunnels. Aris followed, his new blade casting long shadows in the flickering light. They moved deeper into the Undercity, searching for the path that would take them to the Middle District. The way ahead was dark, but for the first time in many loops, Aris felt a spark of something he had almost forgotten, hope. The last mutant rat squealed and collapsed, its twisted body dissolving into a puddle of black ichor. Aris stood over it, breathing hard, the crystalline blade on his left arm dripping with viscous fluid. The XP notification flashed in his mind, a sensation he'd felt 49 times before, yet it never ceased to send a jolt of dread through his spine. Level up was imminent. He couldn't hold it off any longer, the system demanded evolution, and his body would comply, for better or worse. Mira stepped forward, wiping blood from her cheek. "You're about to level again, aren't you?" Her voice was steady, but Aris caught the faint tremor of apprehension. She had seen what his mutations could do, the railgun eye, the rib blades, the crystal arm, and she knew the chaos that accompanied each transformation. Aris nodded, clenching his jaw. "You should stand back. This one. I don't know what it'll be." He looked down at his left arm, the crystalline blade gleaming in the dim light of the sewer tunnel. The mutation had served him well, but it was about to be overwritten, replaced by something new. He felt a familiar heat building in his bones, the precursor to change. The air around him grew thick, almost electric. Mira retreated a few steps, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. Aris closed his eyes, focusing on the process. He never got used to the pain, a searing agony that spread from his core to every extremity. It felt like his cells were being torn apart and reassembled on a whim. His left arm began to tremble. The crystalline structure cracked, fissures spreading along its surface. Shards of crystal fell to the ground, shattering like glass. Aris grunted, biting down on his lip as the pain intensified. Then, without warning, the arm dissolved entirely, turning into a shimmering liquid that pooled at his feet. For a moment, he felt a horrific emptiness where his arm should be, a void that threatened to pull him into despair. But it didn't last. The liquid suddenly surged upward, coiling around his stump like a serpent. He watched in amazed horror as it solidified into multiple tendrils, each one a gleaming metallic appendage. They writhed and twisted independently, clanking against each other like steel cables. Aris's mind expanded to encompass the new limbs, he could feel every vibration through the tendrils, every subtle shift in the air around them. "What the hell?" Mira whispered, her eyes wide. "Aris, your arm." He flexed the tentacles experimentally. They responded instantly, darting out to tap the walls, the ceiling, the floor. They were strong, stronger than his normal arm had ever been, but they were unruly, each one with a mind of its own, almost like trying to control 5 extra limbs simultaneously. A Herculean task of coordination. "It's a weapon," Aris said, his voice strained with effort. "Metallic tentacles. I can control them, but it's a lot." He tried to pull them back into a compact form, but they flailed wildly, almost smacking him in the face. He winced, concentrating harder until they coiled around his forearm like a bracer. Mira approached cautiously, her hand still on her knife. "Can you use them? We still have to get through that tunnel to the middle district." She pointed down the narrow passage ahead, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Aris took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll manage. Stay behind me." He stepped into the tunnel, the tentacles unfurling slightly to sweep the area. The walls were damp with condensation, and the air smelled of rust and decay. Somewhere ahead, he could hear the scurrying of mutants, probably more of the rat-like creatures that had been hounding them. They advanced slowly, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Aris kept the tentacles ready, swaying gently around him like a cobra's hood. He knew from previous loops that this tunnel held a nest of spitter mutants, creatures that could project corrosive acid from their mouths. They were fast and dangerous, but predictable. He had memorized their patrol patterns. Loop 18. A scuttling sound to his right. He spun, the tentacles whipping out instinctively. One of them lashed into the darkness, and he felt a satisfying crunch as it connected with something hard. A mutant squealed, then fell silent. But the noise had alerted more of them. From both ends of the tunnel, shadows emerged. Glowing eyes fixed on them, their owners leaping with unnatural speed. Aris threw himself into action, unleashing the full force of his tentacles. They moved like extensions of his will, each one targeting a different mutant. One tentacle impaled a spitter through the chest, while another wrapped around a second and crushed it with a sickening splinter of bone. A third deflected a glob of acid, the metal searing but holding. Mira backed against him, slashing at anything that came close. "I see why they call it a roulette," she shouted over the chaos. "This is insane." Aris didn't respond. He was sweating, every neuron in his brain firing to maintain control over the unruly mass of tentacles. It was exhausting, like juggling a dozen balls while running a marathon. But it was working. The mutants fell, one after another, until the tunnel grew silent except for the drip of water and the buzz of dying incandescent lights. He let out a shuddering breath, retracting the tentacles as best he could. They coiled back into a compact bundle, but still twitched erratically, threatening to explode outward again at any moment. Mira sheathed her knife, staring at him with a mixture of awe and horror. If that's what a level 5 does, what's level 6 going to turn you into? A bomb? Aris couldn't help a grim chuckle. Maybe worse. Let's not think about that now. He leaned against the wall, feeling the strain. His body was a patchwork of mutations, each one demanding constant focus to control. The tentacles were by far the most taxing, requiring a level of concentration he had never needed before. We need to move, he said, pushing himself upright. The tunnel opens into a chamber ahead. That's the boss's lair. Mira's eyes widened. You fought it before. 50 times, he said, grimacing. But each time, the boss is different. The infrastructure is the same, a broken reactor in the center, unstable energy, and a creature made from failed loopers. It absorbs energy from the reactor to sustain itself. The key is to overload it, but that requires precise timing and sacrifice. Sacrifice, she repeated, stepping up beside him. Last loop, I used my arm to short out the energy core. It worked, but I lost the arm. This time, he looked down at his tentacled arm. Maybe I can use these to do the same damage from a distance. They reached the end of the tunnel. The large chamber opened before them, illuminated by the sickly glow of the damaged reactor. The ceiling was high, lost in shadows, while the floor was covered in debris and rusted machinery. In the center of the room, a grotesque creature sat huddled, a mass of fused human bodies connected by weeping tendrils. It pulsed like a hideous heart, its numerous limbs twitching as if dreaming. The reactor hummed behind it, leaking blue-green radiation that fed directly into the creature. Mira gasped. What is that? It looks like people melted together. Failed loopers, Aris said, his voice cold. People who tried to speedrun the apocalypse before me. They mutated too fast, lost themselves, and ended up fused into that thing. It's a warning, and an obstacle. He stepped into the chamber, his tentacles writhing in anticipation. The light of the reactor made them shimmer, and he could feel a strange resonance in the air, as if the creature was aware of his presence. Then the creature stirred. Its many eyes opened, dozens of them, scattered across its twisted form, and fixed on Aris. The reactor's hum intensified, and energy crackled along the creature's tendrils. Aris a tear, he turned back to Mira, his expression grim. Wait for my signal. When I say, now, run for the collapsed section of the southeast wall. There's a passage behind it that leads straight to the middle district. What about you? She asked. I'll follow, he said. And if I don't, save your sister. And remember our deal. He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he launched himself forward, his tentacles spreading like a fan as he engaged the boss. The creature shrieked, a sound that split the air and made the ground tremble. It lunged with surprising speed, its many arms reaching for Aris. He dodged, sending a tentacle to whip at the creature's side. It connected, tearing a gash that dripped black blood, but the wound immediately began to close. The reactor's energy was healing it. He would need to move fast. Aris focused, guiding 3 of his tentacles toward the reactor while he used the other 2 to parry the boss's blows. The creature was relentless, its attacks almost chaotic, but he knew its patterns from past loops. He weaved through them, his tentacles dipping and weaving like metal serpents. One tentacle touched the reactor casing, and he felt a jolt of electricity course through his body. But he didn't recoil, instead, he pushed more tentacles into the reactor systems, tracing the conduits. He remembered the exact point to overload, just as he had done with his arm in loop 46. Now, he shouted, yanking his tentacles free and diving to the side. Mira sprinted toward the wall, her boots kicking up dust. The reactor began to groan, its light flickering violently. The creature screamed, its body extending tendrils into the machine, trying to absorb the excess energy. But it was too late, the overload was unstoppable. A blinding flash of light. The concussive force blew Aris off his feet, sending him crashing into a pile of rubble. He felt the creature's pain through the spatial distortion, a psychic scream that rattled his brain. Then silence, punctuated by the drip of water. He groaned, pushing himself up. The chamber was in ruins, the reactor shattered, the creature disintegrated. Mira was already at the wall, Pri Boyd pushing aside debris to reveal a hidden tunnel. Aris. Are you okay? She called, her voice echoing. He looked down at his left arm. The tentacles were limp, some of them broken or severed from the blast. The core of his mutation was still there, but unstable, regenerating slowly. I'm functional, he said, staggering to his feet. The cost of another mutation was weighing on him, literally and figuratively. But they were alive. And the way to the middle district lay open. As he limped toward Mira, he felt a new sensation, a restlessness in his bones, a sign of another level up approaching. Not now, he thought. Not yet. He had to reach the top district first. But the roulette never stopped. The chapter ends with Aris and Mira entering the tunnel, the faint lights of the distant city ahead, and the protagonist wondering what his next mutation would bring. The air in the sewer core chamber turned thick and viscous as the organic mass before them stirred. It was a grotesque amalgamation of failed loopers, flesh stitched together by some corrupt process, multiple limbs twitching in discordant rhythms. Aris's metallic tentacles, still smoldering from the earlier fight, coiled reflexively around his arm as he assessed the threat. The boss let out a sound that was half roar, half scream, a cacophony of voices layered upon each other, as if every absorbed looper was crying out in agony. Its skin was a patchwork of textures, smooth and bulbous in some places, cracked and oozing in others. Several mouths puckered across its surface, teeth grinding against each other, producing a wet, scraping sound that made Mira flinch. It's feeding on the reactor, Aris said, his voice low but steady. That's its energy source. If we can overload the core, the surge will destabilize it. Mira clutched her pistol, her free hand trembling slightly. How do we overload it? We need to hit it with enough force to trigger a feedback loop. My railgun I can do it, but it needs time to fully charge. The last shot drained it, I need at least 30 seconds. The boss lunged. From three of its mouths, streams of green acid sprayed across the chamber, sizzling against concrete and metal alike. Aris reacted instinctively, swinging his tentacle arm upward to hook onto a ceiling pipe. He pulled himself and Mira up just as the acid washed over the spot where they stood, leaving a smoking crater. Hold on. Aris shouted, his tentacles groaning under their combined weight. He shifted his grip, dangling from the pipe as the boss below searched for them, its multiple eyes swiveling in different directions. Mira swung her legs onto a crossbeam, finding a foothold. I thought you said we were prepared. I said I've seen this fight before. That doesn't mean it's easy. Aris grunted, his railgun eye beginning to glow a faint blue as he focused. Buy me time. Shoot at the reactor core when you get a clear shot. Just don't hit the fuel lines, if those rupture, we're all vapor. Mira nodded, steadying her weapon. She took aim at the boss's central mass, pulling the trigger. The bullet ricocheted off a thick patch of armored flesh, sparking uselessly. It's not doing anything. Aim for the mouths. They're softer. Aris twisted, his tentacles coiling to lower him just enough to gain a better angle. The boss turned, three of its mouths tracking his movement. Acid sprayed again. Aris swung sideways, avoiding the brunt of the attack, but a droplet caught his leg. He bit back a cry as the acid ate through his pants, sizzling against the metal plates that had grown there. The pain was sharp, but not debilitating. Mira fired again, this time hitting one of the mouths directly. The flesh rippled, and the mouth recoiled with a screech. It worked, she called out, a note of triumph in her voice. Keep it up. I'm almost at full charge. Aris's vision swam as he concentrated, the familiar pressure building behind his eye socket. The beam would be powerful enough to crack the reactor's casing, but he needed pinpoint accuracy. Too far left, and he'd hit the coolant tanks. Too far right, and the beam would graze the boss, incensing it further. The boss howled, its body convulsing as it shifted its attention fully to Mira. It pulled itself along the floor with a dozen misshapen limbs, moving faster than its bulk suggested. Mira scrambled along the crossbeam, firing shot after shot, hitting patches of soft flesh and driving the boss back. But she was running out of ammunition. "I'm almost empty," she yelled. Aris's eye flared to full brightness. "I'm ready. Get down." Mira dropped from the beam, landing in a roll just as the boss lunged toward her spot. Aris fired. A lance of pure energy, crackling with static, erupted from his eye and tore through the air. It struck the reactor core dead center, punching through the reinforced casing and embedding itself in the heavy fuel rods. For a moment, everything was still. The boss paused, its limbs frozen mid-motion. Then the core began to glow an angry orange. Waves of heat radiated outward, and the chamber hummed with a deep, dangerous vibration. Aris knew that sound. It was the prelude to a catastrophic overload. The boss writhed, its form starting to blister and slew off in sheets. It let out a final, deafening roar as the reactor's energy surged uncontrollably through its body, causing the flesh to melt and flow like wax. The entire structure of the boss collapsed inward, viscous streams of black sludge pooling on the floor. But the overload was too powerful. Debris began to fall from the ceiling, and the metal catwalk where Aris hung swayed dangerously. He had to get out, now. He swung his tentacle arm upward, aiming for a handhold on an upper level where he could see an access hatch, a tunnel that would lead them to the middle district. But his timing was off. The reactor exploded, a burst of blinding light and heat knocking him off balance. Pain seared through his arm as a fragment of shrapnel, or maybe the shockwave itself, severed one of the tentacles. He screamed, the sound ragged and raw, as the limb detached from his shoulder, falling in a spray of black ichor. The tentacle writhed on the ground, its nerves still firing before it dissolved into sludge. Aris's vision swam. He could feel blood, or something like it, pouring from the open wound. The stump looked like chewed metal wires fused with organic tissue. The regeneration that should have been automatic was sluggish, his mutation system, unpredictable as ever, was failing to react quickly enough. Terror spiked in his chest alongside the pain. Mira was at his side in seconds, her face ashen. "Aris. Your arm." "I know," he gritted out, forcing himself to stay conscious. "How's the core?" It's collapsing. We need to move. Now." He slung his remaining tentacle over her shoulder, using her as a crutch. "Yes. The exit, the hatch above us. Quickly." He limped alongside her, staggering as each step sent fresh agony through his ruined shoulder. The boss's dying movements had triggered a chain reaction, the entire chamber was coming down around them. Cracks spider webbed up the walls, and the ceiling groaned ominously. They reached the ladder leading to the access hatch. Mira climbed first, then pulled him up with a strength born of desperation. He grit his teeth against the pain, pulling himself rung by rung, leaving a trail of black ichor on the metal. Fuel vents ruptured overhead. That last thing Aris heard before his vision went white was Mira's scream, then the roaring whisper of flame. When the world came back, he found himself in a dark, quiet tunnel, the sharp smell of burned air in his nostrils. His arm was a mangled mess, the stump already scabbing over with a layer of metallic-looking tissue. Mira held his head in her lap, her face stained with tears and grime. He saw her exhaustion, the 100-yard stare she was trying to hide. "We made it through," she whispered, not quite believing it. Aris managed a weak smile. "That's one in a row." Then the familiar, unwelcome sensation settled over him, like a wire tightening behind his eyes. He recognized the precursor to a level up. "Hold on, Aris," Mira said, seeing his expression. "Don't you dare level up now." It was already too late. His body began to tremble. The pain in his shoulder spiked, burning ice cold and then searing hot. Deep within his flesh, something changed. He couldn't afford to lose control, not here. He squeezed his eyes shut, channeling all his willpower into molding the mutation, forcing it to stabilize where his body needed it. When he opened his eyes, the wound was still raw, but his missing limb, the destroyed tentacle, had been partially replaced by hardened, scale-like skin that armored his shoulder, as if his body had prioritized protection over restoration. It felt heavy, but sustainable for now. "Your arm, what happened?" Mira asked, her eyes wide. "Adaptation," he replied, hoarse and detached. "The system is adaptable. I'll get through it." He allowed himself the luxury of lying flat for the count of 5 seconds, catching his breath, letting the pain recede. Then he forced himself up. The tunnel extended ahead, leading deeper into the urban ruins they had barely glimpsed so far. In the distance, the light of the top district glittered like a false promise. The loop would allow him to try again if he failed. But maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't need to. The pressure of the collapsing sewer pushed against them like a living thing. Rubble cascaded behind Mira as she hauled Aris by his collar, her boots skidding on wet stone. Dust choked the tunnel, mixing with the metallic scent of blood, his blood. Aris's world had narrowed to a pinprick of agony where his left arm used to be. The tentacles were gone, severed in the explosion that had immolated the fusion of failed loopers. Now, only a ragged stump remained, wrapped in torn fabric that Mira had tied in haste. He tried to speak, to tell her the tunnel branch was 2 meters ahead, but his voice came out as a gurgle. "Shut up and move," Mira hissed, her grip tightening. She was smaller than him, but desperation lent her strength. They lurched forward as a chunk of ceiling thundered down behind them, spraying gravel against his back. The air grew thick with the reek of sewage and ozone from the reactor's death throes. Aris focused on counting breaths, a trick he'd learned in the 43rd loop when a lung-bursting parasite had nested in his chest. 1, 2, 3. Each step was a victory against the suffocating weight of his own body. They burst through an archway into a slanting corridor where rusted pipes dripped orange water. The sounds of the collapse grew muffled, blocked by tons of debris that now sealed their path back. Mira didn't stop. She dragged him up a ladder bolted to the wall, the rungs slick with algae. Aris's arm, his remaining arm, clung weakly, his palms scraping against metal. The climb lasted an eternity, each pull sending fresh agony through his shoulder. At the top, a manhole cover loomed, dimly lit from above. Mira shoved it aside with a grunt, and cold rain spilled down, numbing his face. They emerged into a narrow alley between crumbling tenements. Rain hammered the asphalt, turning the world into a gray smear. Mira let him collapse against a dumpster, his back hitting the wet metal with a clang. She crouched beside him, her breath ragged, as she inspected the bloody bandages. "This isn't clotting fast enough," she muttered, pulling a strip of cloth from her own shirt. Her fingers worked swiftly, tightening the bindings with practiced efficiency. Aris watched the rain soak through her hair, tracing rivulets down her cheeks. The cold felt good, it dulled the burning in his arm. Or what was left of it. "I can't feel my fingers," he said, his voice hollow. He stared at the stump, now a mummified lump of stained fabric. The silver scales that had covered his shoulder before the mutation had crawled down the wound, forming a protective cap over the stump. They shimmered like fish scales, an organic armor that had sealed the breach. Mira pressed her palm against his shoulder, and he flinched. "It's a mutation," she said, not looking at him. "It won't grow back. But the scales are stopping the bleeding." Her voice was flat, clinical. He knew she was trying to distance herself from the horror of it. He had taught her that trick, compartmentalize the terror, file it away. But her hand trembled against his skin. Aris attempted to move the tentacle stumps, the ones that had been severed near the base. Beneath the scales, he felt a faint tingle, a ghost sensation of control. The stumps were still there, sealed beneath the armor like dead nerves. He could almost feel them twitch, even if nothing moved. "They're still alive," he whispered, more to himself. "The mutation is adapting." He laughed, a brittle sound like cracking ice. "My body is literally trying to grow armor over everything." Mira sat back on her heels, her pistol resting on her knee. The magazine was depleted, only 2 rounds remained. She checked the chamber, then tucked the gun away in her waistband. "We're out of ammunition," she said. "And you're down an arm. We need supplies, food, water, maybe a weapons cache. The middle district should have a market hub on the east side." She was reciting facts he had told her hours ago, during the briefing before they entered the sewer. He remembered it like a dream, the words echoing in his skull. "East side," he echoed, his eyelids growing heavy. "But there's a nest of alpha spikers in the apartment block next to it. We need to go around via the overpass, even though it's longer." The knowledge dripped from him like rain, automatic. His head lolled against the dumpster, and the world spun. He saw the grainy concrete of the wall, the cracks in the brickwork, and, behind them, a shape. A shadow that did not match the light. He tried to focus, but his vision dimmed. Then she was there. A woman, pale and skeletal, with his own eyes. She stood at the end of the alley where the rain blurred into a curtain. She wore a tattered lab coat stained with old blood, and her left arm ended in the same scaled stump as his. Aris tried to push himself up, but his body refused. "Who are you?" he gasped, his voice barely audible. Mira turned, following his gaze. "What? There's no one there." But he saw him, not her. The figure shifted, became a man with a familiar jawline, a beard coated with grime. His eyes were deep sunken, but Aris recognized the lines of his own face. It was him. A version of him, from some other loop, some other failure. The figure raised his stump, pointing at Aris, and mouthed a single word, "Each." Then the rain cleared, and he was gone. A shiver ran down Aris's spine. His teeth chattered, though the air wasn't cold. "I saw, my past self. He told me, that each mutation leaves a permanent mark on my soul." He repeated the words as if they were a prophecy, something that had been etched into his marrow. "Your soul." Mira's voice dripped with skepticism, but she held his shoulder again. "You have a concussion. You rambled about something like that earlier, about the loop scarring your mind. You called it, fragmentation." She forced water from a canteen into his mouth, and he choked. The water was warm and tasted of rust. Fragmentation. Yes. That was the term he had used. Every loop, every mutation, echoed in his consciousness. But this was the first time he had seen a ghost. He closed his eyes, and behind his lids, he saw a montage, a heart that pumped acid, a spine of razors, a tongue that sang sonic waves. Each image burned like a brand. These were not dreams, they were memories from loops he had never lived, mutations he had never chosen. The ghosts of other arises, refusing to fade. He wanted to dissect this. To catalog it and use it like any other piece of information. But his mind would not cooperate. Exhaustion pulled him toward darkness, and he let himself sink, trusting Mira to keep watch. The rain continued to fall, a liquid drumbeat on trash lids. Somewhere above, a mutant bird shrieked. Mira shook him awake an hour later. The rain had stopped, leaving the alley glistening and smelling of petrichor. The sky was still overcast, the pale gray of morning or evening, impossible to tell. Aris blinked, his right hand instinctively reaching for his left arm. Air met his palm. He looked down. The stump had swollen, the scales now covering it entirely, forming a convex disc. When he touched it, he felt nothing but pressure. 3 mutations now, he said slowly, cataloging internally. Railgun eye, scaled shoulder, and, whatever the left arm became. Mira handed him a half-eaten energy bar she had scavenged from a pocket. He tore at the wrapper with his teeth, the taste of stale peanuts filling his mouth. "You passed out. I thought you died. But your heart kept beating," she said. There was an unusual flatness to her voice, too controlled. He noticed her knuckles were white where she clasped her fingers together. "I won't die yet." He forced a smile, but it came out as a grimace. "I've died 50 times, remember? I know the signs. This isn't one of them." He gestured toward the sewer grate they had emerged from. "That boss, that was the final gatekeeper for the Middle District. The path is clear now, but we have maybe 12 hours before the top district enforcers send a cleanup crew. We need to move." Mia stood, offering him a hand. He took it, pulling himself upright. His legs held, but the world tilted sideways. He leaned against the wall until the spinning stopped. The scales on his shoulder seemed to flex, a slight warming sensation that lessened the pain. Symbiotic, he thought. The mutation is becoming part of my physiology. They started down the alley, hugging the shadows. Aris led, his previous knowledge guiding each step, a collapsed wall he could use as cover, an open sewer drain that had a safe path beneath. He saw the Middle District through his memories, a concrete grid of shops and apartments, now repurposed by survivors and scavenger gangs. The food cache they needed was in what used to be a bakery, hidden behind a fake wall on the second floor. Mira kept her hand on the pistol, her eyes scanning darting movements that were just rats catching the last leavings of humanity. Halfway to the overpass, Aris stumbled. His hand caught a drainpipe, and the pain shot up to his shoulder so sharply his vision went white. He felt a ripple run through the scales, a sensation like somebody was trying to push a hand through a membrane from the other side. The scars, he hissed. They're moving. Mira grabbed his arm and looked. The scales were pulsing, the edges rising and falling. Beneath them, something dark stirred. Then they stilled. Her eyebrows went up. You're right. This mutation is still active. It might be healing more than we thought. But Aris shook his head. He had seen the ghost again, this time briefer, a flash of a woman with his face trapped in a resonator. No time to think. He forced his legs forward, his teeth gritted. We need to keep moving. If the top district finds out I'm here, they'll know exactly where we're heading. They reached the overpass at nightfall. The concrete structure was intact, a canopy of shadow that stretched over the road. Empty cars clogged the lanes, skeletons still in their seats, their hands fused to the steering wheels. Mira climbed a patrol car to survey the area below. The market hub is 4 blocks that way, she said, pointing. But I see movement, figures that look nothing like human. Aris leaned against a broken lamppost, his eyes half closed. He felt another level up tickling the periphery of his senses, like an insect crawling under his skin. Not yet, he pleaded. Give me more time. But he knew the end drew closer. Every mutation pushed him nearer to a singularity, something the past loops had never fully articulated. The top district knew about it, they called it the weakening. He didn't know if he could break the loop before his own body changed him beyond recognition. Mira, if I mutate again, he began, then stopped. He had no words for her, no plan. He touched the scaled stump on his shoulder. Promise me you'll keep going. If I become something else, you have to finish it. Her eyes were unreadable, hooded and dark. Then she gave a small nod. I'll do what you taught me. A sound like grinding stone echoed from the sewer they had escaped, distant and furious. Something new was awaking down there, a creature born from the explosion, fermented in the heat of the reactor. But they were already gone. They two shadows moved through the ruins, one grasping at the ghost of a limb, the other carrying memories that were not her own. The rain had stopped, leaving the alley slick with grime and the faint metallic tang of blood. Aris leaned against a crumbling brick wall, his breath ragged. His left shoulder, now clad in scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, throbbed with a dull ache. The ghost of his tentacled arm still twitched in his mind, a phantom limb that reminded him of what he'd lost. Mira knelt beside him, her small hands pressing a clean cloth against the stump, though the scales had already sealed the wound. We need to find somewhere safe, she said, her voice low but steady. You're in no condition to fight another skirmish. Aris nodded, his railgun eye scanning the alley for threats. The market hub below the overpass had been quiet, but he knew better than to trust silence in this world. Mutants could be cunning, and rogue humans were often worse. He pushed off the wall, wincing as his weight shifted. There's an old maintenance shed a block east. I cached some supplies there a few loops ago, if it hasn't been looted. They moved cautiously, sticking to shadows and avoiding open ground. The streets were littered with debris, overturned cars, shattered glass, and the skeletal remains of buildings that had long since collapsed. Aris kept his railgun eye active, the faint hum of energy building in his socket a constant companion. His ghost vision flickered at the edges of his perception, showing him echoes of his past selves, a woman bleeding out on the pavement, a man clawing at his own face, a child holding a teddy bear. He forced the visions down, focusing on the present. They reached the shed without incident. The door was rusted but intact, the lock broken. Aris kicked it open, revealing a cramped space filled with dust and moldy crates. He scanned the interior, memorizing the layout from countless loops. In the corner, under a tarp, he found his cache, a duffel bag with bottled water, canned food, a medkit, and a map of the city. He also pulled out a small device, a radio scanner, jury-rigged to intercept military frequencies. We'll rest here for an hour, Aris said, handing Mira a bottle of water. Then we need to move. The middle district is close, but the road is dangerous. Mira uncapped the bottle and drank deeply, her eyes never leaving him. You're mutating again soon, aren't you? Aris felt his stomach clench. He knew. His body was already signaling the next evolution, a warmth pooling in his gut, like a second heartbeat. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned on the radio scanner, listening to the static and disjointed voices. After a few minutes, he found a repeating broadcast, top district sealed. Barrier frequency 184.7. Key required. Blood sample from pure human. Key required. Blood sample, the message looped, cold and automated. Aris stiffened. That's new. In previous loops, the barrier didn't have such a specific requirement. It just opened for anyone with enough clearance. He glanced at Mira. Your key, what exactly is it? Mira reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, crystalline object, no larger than her palm. It glowed with a faint blue light, pulsating like a heart. I found it near the sewer entrance. It was embedded in a body, a woman who looked like she'd been dead for days. I didn't know what it was, but it felt important. Aris took it carefully, turning it over in his hand. The key hummed against his skin, and he felt a strange resonance, as if it recognized him. The broadcast says it needs a pure human's blood. Anyone with physical mutations, like me, won't work. The barrier will reject us. He looked her in the eye. That means you're the only one who can open it. Mira's expression flickered, fear, then resolve. My mutation is mental. I can absorb memories, sense loopers, but my body is unchanged. I'm still human, biologically. Yes, Aris said, and a plan began to form. So I have to get you to the gate. Once you're inside, you can deactivate the barrier from the control room. I've done it before, I know the layout. What about you? She asked, her voice soft. I'll find another way in. Or I'll wait outside. But first, we have to cross the central plaza. He unfolded the map and pointed to a red circle. It's controlled by a warlord named Kale. He's a former looper like me, but he gave up on breaking the loop. He hoards resources, and he doesn't let anyone pass without tribute. Mira studied the map. Why didn't we go around? Because every other route is either collapsed or flooded with mutants. The plaza is the only path to the top district, and Kale knows it. He's fortified it with turrets and snipers. In my last loop, I had to fight through. He looked at his scaled shoulder, current state, I'm not sure I could survive a direct confrontation. Then we negotiate, Mira said. You said you have experience. Maybe we can offer him something. Aris laughed bitterly. Kale doesn't negotiate. He takes what he wants. The only language he speaks is force. He paused, a thought striking him. But there might be another way. He keeps a stash of medical supplies. If I can get my hands on an inhibitor drug, something that suppresses mutations, I might be able to stabilize my body long enough to pass as a pure human. It's a long shot, but... He trailed off, clutching his stomach. The warmth was growing, spreading like wildfire through his veins. He doubled over, gritting his teeth as his body began to tremble. Mira rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. Aris. It's happening, isn't it? Yes, he gasped. I can feel it. Something in my stomach, it's changing. His ribs shifted under his skin, and a wave of nausea hit him. He retched, but nothing came up except a thin, acidic fluid that sizzled on the concrete floor. Mira held him steady, her eyes wide but determined. Fight it, she whispered. Control it. Aris tried to focus, to guide the mutation into something useful, but the change was too quick. A sharp pain pierced his gut, and he looked down to see his abdomen distending, the skin stretching taut. Through his shirt, an orange glow seethed, magical and carcinizing. Then, with a wet tear, a hole opened in his stomach. But instead of spilling blood, a sticky, black substance oozed out, gathering into a pulsing mass. He felt his stomach lining reorganize, the hole sealing, leaving a second mouth, a slit in his belly lined with teeth. He stared in horror, his train of thought disarmed. What the hell? The mouth spoke, not with words, but with a clicking sound, like chattering teeth. It was a new appendage, an adaptive organ that could bite or perhaps digest. Mira staggered back, repulsion flickering across her face. That's new. Aris let out a choked laugh. Yeah. A stomach mouth. Just what I needed. He touched the slit carefully, feeling the wet muscle beneath. It pulsed with a ghastly life, hungry and wild. He stood up, swaying, and closed his eyes. The mutation was settled, but his body felt heavier, more alien. He knew that every change pushed him further from humanity, further from being able to use that key. I need a blood sample from you, he said abruptly. Before I mutate any more. In case I lose myself. Mira hesitated, then nodded. She pulled a small knife from her belt and sliced her palm, letting the crimson drip into a clean vial he produced from the medkit. He sealed it carefully, labeling it with her name. Now we need to move, he said, stuffing the vial into his pack. There's a safe house in the ruins of the old hospital, a mile from here. We can hole up there and plan our infiltration into Kale's territory. They gathered their gear and left the shed, stepping into the fading twilight. The sky was a bruised purple, clouds heavy with unshed rain. As they walked, Aris felt the new mouth on his stomach grow restive, salivating. He concentrated to keep it closed, but the sensation was distracting, like carrying a second identity in his body. They made their way through the rubble, avoiding open sightlines. Mira was quiet, her mind whirring. She finally spoke, what if you are too mutated to go near the gate? What if the key rejects you for contamination even if you're carrying my blood? Then you go in alone, Aris replied without hesitation. I give you the rest of my data, the control room codes, the location of the final boss. You finish what I started. Mira stopped walking. I can't. I need your knowledge. I'm not strong enough. You will be. You've survived this long. But his voice held little conviction. He knew that alone, she would die. But what choice did he have? An hour later, they reached the hospital. It was a grim skeleton of steel and concrete, windows shattered, walls riddled with bullet holes. Inside, they found a room on the third floor that still had a lock. They barred the door and collapsed onto dusty mattresses. Mira drifted to sleep first. Aris lay awake, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on his new belly mouth. It breathed in rhythm with his chest, a sickening sync. He flexed his railgun eye, tested his scaled shoulder. He was a patchwork, a monster held together by memory and will. He thought of the final boss, waiting in the top district. The thing that controlled the loops, that kept everyone trapped in this apocalypse. He'd almost faced it once, a dozen loops ago. It had killed him with a glance. But now, with his mutations, with Mira's power, he had a chance. If he could just get her to the barrier, if he could just survive the crossing. His stomach grumbled, but not from hunger. From that new mouth, thrashing, eager to taste blood. The mutation was stabilizing, but he could sense another one building. He didn't have time. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant sound of gunfire. Kale's war zone awaited. And Aris's body was no longer entirely his own. The rain had stopped, but the air still clung to Aris like a wet shroud. Every breath he took scraped against his throat, and the new mouth in his stomach growled with a life of its own. He pressed a hand against his abdomen, feeling the faint vibration of something alien beneath his skin. Mira walked beside him, her eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways, her pistol held low but ready. They had left the hospital's safe house an hour ago, following a route Aris remembered from Loop 34. Back then, the central plaza had been a staging ground for scavengers, a chaotic free-for-all where the strong took what they wanted. Now it was Kale's domain, a warlord who had turned the place into a fortress of concrete and rusted metal. Aris guided them through a network of drainage ditches that ran parallel to the main thoroughfare. The ditches were shallow, barely a meter deep, but they offered cover from the patrols above. The walls were slick with moss and grime, and the water that pooled at the bottom reeked of decay. Aris's boots squelched with every step, and he made a mental note to find dry socks as soon as possible. They reached a junction where the ditch split into two tunnels. Aris paused, closing his eyes to access the map etched into his mind from dozens of loops. Left led to a dead end, but right would take them under the old market square, where Kale had set up a checkpoint. This way, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mira nodded, her footsteps silent despite the water. She had a knack for moving without sound, a skill she'd developed long before meeting him, he guessed. He envied her silence, his own steps seemed to announce his presence to anyone within 100 meters. They emerged from the ditch behind a collapsed wall of the market square. The square itself was a nightmare of shattered concrete and twisted steel, but Kale's men had fortified the main buildings. Aris could see them now, a trio of soldiers in mismatched armor patrolling the edge of the square, their weapons glinting in the pale light. He pressed himself flat against the wall, Mira mimicking his stance. He studied the patrol's pattern. They moved in a staggered line, one covering left, one right, and one scanning ahead. A classic formation, but predictable. In Loop 38, he had memorized their exact timing, 47 seconds for a full rotation, with a 5-second gap where the right-side soldier passed behind a burned-out truck. He tapped Mira's shoulder and pointed to the gap. She understood immediately, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the patrol. They counted together, Aris's lips moving silently. When the soldier behind the truck disappeared from view, they moved. They dashed across the open ground, their steps quick and quiet. Aris's stomach-mouth whimpered, a pathetic sound that made his skin crawl. He clenched his abdominal muscles to stifle it, but the sensation was like trying to quiet a hungry animal. They reached a doorway leading into a 2-story building that had once been a pharmacy. The shelves were bare, the glass counters smashed, but the layout offered a shortcut to the other side of the square. Aris pushed the door open, its hinges screaming in protest. He winced and slipped inside, with Mira close behind. The interior was dark, lit only by the dim light filtering through grimy windows. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling corners, and the floor was littered with debris and empty vials. They navigated through the back room, heading toward a staircase that led to the roof. But as they reached the stairs, Aris felt a familiar pain ripple through his lower body. It started as a dull ache, then intensified into a searing heat that made him gasp. He doubled over, his hands clutching his stomach. Aris? Mira's voice was sharp with worry. It's another mutation, he grunted, his vision blurring. We need to stop. Just for a moment. She helped him into a corner, where he slumped against the wall. His body seemed to convulse of its own accord, the muscles in his abdomen contracting and twisting. The pain was exquisite, like being turned inside out. But he'd felt worse, survived worse, in the 50 loops before this one. After what felt like an eternity, the pain subsided, replaced by a strange sense of pressure in his digestive tract. He lifted his shirt and stared at his stomach. The mouth was still there, but it looked different now, the lips were more defined, and small, sharp teeth lined the rim. It yawned, and a fine mist of acidic vapor hissed out. He quickly dropped his shirt, his mind racing. The mutation in his stomach had specialized. Not just a mouth, but now a mini acid factory. He could dissolve organic matter. Good. Very good. It might be useful. Mira knelt beside him, her eyes fixed on his face rather than his abdomen. Are you okay? I'm fine, he lied, forcing a weak smile. Just a new trick. My stomach can digest things, more thoroughly now. She gave him a cautious look but didn't press further. Instead, she turned her attention to the hallway ahead. There's a patrol approaching. They'll be here in 30 seconds. Aris listened, and sure enough, he heard the rhythmic tramp of boots on concrete. They couldn't backtrack, that would put them back in the open square. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a steel door leading to what looked like a storage closet. In there, he said, pointing. They slipped into the closet, pulling the door shut just as the footsteps grew louder. The closet was cramped, barely a meter wide, and they had to stand shoulder to shoulder. Aris could feel Mira's breath on his neck, her scent a mix of sweat and ozone. A single soldier walked past the door, his boots echoing in the pharmacy's main room. He paused, and Aris held his own breath. The soldier muttered something to himself, then continued on. The footsteps faded, and a door slammed shut in the distance. Clear, Mira whispered. They left the closet and took the stairs up. The roof offered a clear view of the square below, and the path to the other side. But Kale's men had set up a barricade in the street beyond, a wall of overturned trucks and scrap metal, topped with barbed wire. 2 guards stood watch at either end, their rifles trained on the approach. We can't go that way, Mira said, her voice flat. Not without a fight. Or we take the underground maintenance tunnels, Aris replied, pointing to a manhole cover near the far end of the square. It'll take us straight to the other side of the checkpoint. The manhole is in the open. They'll see us. Aris grinned, a macabre expression he'd honed over loops. Not if we cause a distraction. He led her back downstairs to the ground floor, where he found what he was looking for, a dead rat in the corner, its body desiccated but still intact. He picked it up by the tail, the fur dry against his fingers. Mira watched him with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. What are you doing? He knelt down, cupping the rat in both hands. He focused on his stomach, willing it to wake. The mouth yawned open, and a stream of yellow-green liquid shot out, coating the rat's body. The rodent immediately began to dissolve, the flesh bubbling and hissing. Within seconds, it was nothing more than a brownish sludge that seeped into the cracks of the floor. Mira stared at the remains, then at Aris, her eyes wide. That's a lot of acid. Exactly, he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Now, let's go. They returned to the roof, and Aris took aim at the front guard station. He concentrated, focusing on the lump in his stomach, that new organ that seemed to have a direct pipeline to his esophagus. He belched, and a glob of acid shot out, arcing across the square and splattering against the corrugated metal of the guard post. It sizzled loudly, steam rising in a thick cloud. The guards immediately reacted, shouting in alarm. One of them rushed over to investigate, while the other called for backup. The distraction was working perfectly. The guards were now focused on the acid strike, their attention split between the smoking post and the surrounding shadows. Aris and Mira descended from the roof, slipping back through the pharmacy and into the courtyard near the manhole. They reached the cover just as a second guard arrived, his weapon raised at the smoking post. Aris used the moment to pry open the manhole cover, grunting at the effort. The metal was heavy, but his scaled shoulder provided the needed leverage. He dropped into the darkness, landing on a rusted ladder that rattled under his weight. Mira followed, her descent silent and graceful. They descended a dozen meters until they reached the base of a tunnel that was claustrophobic and dark. The tunnel was narrow, reinforced with crumbling concrete that was stained with moisture. The air was stale, filled with the metallic tang of old water. Pipes lined the walls, gurgling and dripping. Aris took a moment to orient himself, then led the way east, which the map in his head confirmed led under the checkpoint. They advanced steadily, navigating through a maze of tunnels. At one juncture, they encountered a collapsed section that forced them to retrace steps and find an alternate route. Aris's stomach-mouth rumbled repeatedly, a constant reminder of the volatile organ he carried like a hidden grenade. "How are you doing?" Mira asked as they passed through a section of tunnel that was crosshatched with shadows. "Peachy," Aris replied, his voice resonant in the dank passage. She gave him a skeptical look but said nothing. Her focus was on her surroundings, and Aris was grateful for it. She didn't ask questions when he'd rather not answer them. Ahead, Aris saw a hatch that led up to the surface. "That should put us in a warehouse near the edge of Kale's territory. Once we're there, we can circle around to the highway leading up the hill." Mira nodded and pressed her ear against the hatch. She held up a single finger, then gestured for him to open it. Aris braced himself, then pushed the hatch open with a grunt. The top swung outward, and he climbed into a space that smelled of diesel and oil. The warehouse was massive, filled with old machinery and container stacks. Weak electrical lighting still burned, casting long stretches of shadow. At the far end, a huge gate stood locked shut. It would cost explosive force to breach. "Over here," Aris called, spotting another exit. They moved toward it, but as they neared, a figure emerged from behind a diesel generator. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat over what looked like advanced military-grade chest and shoulder armor. The face was gaunt, hair grayed, eyes sharp. But the most striking feature was his right arm, a mechanical blade, gleaming and tapered. "Kale," Aris whispered, his mind running through combat alternatives. Mira tensed beside him, her hand going to her pistol. But Kale paid her no mind. Instead, his attention was fixed on Aris, and he smiled a thin, chilling smile. "Aris. It is you," Kale drawled. "I remember you." Scurry bore through, "which loop number?" Aris lowered himself into readiness. He had survived 50 loops before, and had died to Kale's blade more times than he would like to admit. His stomach-mouth gurgled, ready to spew acid. His rib blades felt stirrings in his back, preparing. Kale took a step forward, both blades lowered. You are impressively colorful this time. But this ends here. His mechanical arm whirred, blade extending for combat. The tunnel air reeked of damp concrete and stale blood. Aris pressed his back against the curved wall, breathing shallowly through a throat that felt raw from the acid he'd produced earlier. His stomach churned, the new mouth inside it slobbering faintly against his guts. Next to him, Mira adjusted her grip on the thermal pistol, a weapon she'd scavenged from a dead soldier 3 blocks back. Her eyes were fixed on the faint light at the tunnel's end, where the central plaza sprawled under the watchful eye of Warlord Kale's fortress. "We're close," she whispered. The apartment complex on the far side should have an access ladder to the upper district. From there, a man stepped out of the shadows behind her. Mira reacted first, pivoting and firing. The thermal round sliced through the air, but the man was already gone, a blur of motion that left afterimages in Aris's vision. He felt a cold prickle at his neck, and then Kale's voice, smooth and amused, slithered into his ear. "Loop 51, was it?" Aris didn't turn. He'd looped enough times to know not to give a predator your throat. 50 at most. "You'd be, 30-something. 37, Kale said. His cybernetic arm whirred softly as he stepped into the light. He was tall, built like a military veteran, with a shaved head and a jawline scarred from old shrapnel. The blade attached to his right forearm glinted with a faint blue sheen, probably wired into his nervous system for enhanced speed. "I remember you in Loop 14. You were the one who taught me how to kill the Chrysalis Queen. Seems we've both come a long way." Aris's stomach mouth growled, a low, wet sound that made Mira flinch. "Not far enough." Kale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That key you're carrying, the crystal. I need it. And the girl." He gestured with his bare hand, fingers twitching. "She's got the blood sample, right? Pure human. Rare as a sunrise these days." Mira's pistol was steady. Her grip must have iced over, but her breathing remained quiet. Aris knew that if she fired, Kale would be gone before the round left the barrel. The man was fast, not just mutant fast, but augmented, honed from decades of hoarding stolen abilities. He could see it in the way Kale's eyes flickered, tracking multiple points at once, infrared, thermal, spatial mapping. Whatever implants he'd scavenged, they were top tier. "I'll make you a deal, mate," Kale said, stepping closer. His boots echoed on the concrete, each footfall deliberate. "Give me the key and the girl. I'll let you walk out of here with your remaining features intact. That's more than most loopers get." Aris didn't bother answering. He just moved. His right arm, the one that had been a tentacle, now a sealed stump, swung forward like a whip. The scales on his shoulder flattened into aerodynamic blades, and the ghost sensation of the lost limb tingled as the stump elongated, forming a crude club of scar tissue and keratin. Kale dodged, but the blow grazed his armored vest, sending sparks. "Oi, you're missing the skyhook, man," Kale laughed, sidestepping another sweep. "That tentacle was your best feature." Aris ignored him. His left hand shot out, 3 fingers melting into horn-like spikes as he aimed for Kale's eyes. But Kale's blade arm swept up, severing the spikes clean off. Pain bloomed white in Aris's nerves, but he bit down, letting his stomach acid spray from a second mouth that opened just below his navel. The acid caught Kale across the chest. He howled, staggering back as his plate mail vaporized in a hiss of corrosive fog. But even as he retreated, his arm moved of its own accord, a blur, swiping at Mira. She dove sideways, but the blade caught her calf, ripping a line of blood. "Mira! Stay low!" Aris commanded, crouching to use the tunnel's curve for cover. Kale spat into his hand, touching the melted armor with fingers that were already regenerating. "Got your goblin's bag, have you? Acid belly. How unique. I've got a bladder that leaks napalm. Want to play match?" This wasn't working. Aris knew Kale's fighting style from 30 loops back, aggressive, always pushing, baiting mistakes while his regeneration soaked damage. In large-scale map loops, Aris had exploited terrain height and staggering grenades. But here, in a claustrophobic sewer tunnel, the advantage belonged entirely to Kale. Aris slipped his hand into his jacket pocket. The blue core battery he'd scavenged from the sewer core was still there, humming with residual energy. He had one shot. Mira, when I say go, you fire at the ground. High power. Her eyes met his, two questions stacked in a moment, but she nodded, steadying her pistol with both hands. Kale tilted his head. Thinking, eh. Last loopers who tried thinking ended up inside my vault memory cores. He stretched his arm, blades clicking. Fun fact, I can pulse my blade arm with electricity. Burns right through defensive mutations. Let's see how many I haven't killed. He lunged. Kale closed the gap in a heartbeat, his bladed arm extended, aiming a vertical slash at Aris's torso. Aris didn't retreat. He advanced, parrying with his left side, letting the blade embed into his rib cage. The agony was astronomical, a fire spreading through his chest, but he'd expected it. As the blade stuck, Aris pivoted, bracing his foot against the wall, and used his body weight to jam it deeper, locking Kale's arm in place. Kale grunted, trying to yank free. What are you? Now. Aris shouted. Mira fired at the ground between them. The thermal round detonated in a burst of superheated gas. The explosion slammed into Kale, sending him tumbling back, his arms still trapped in Aris's carcass. Aris screamed as the blade tore through his ribs, but he didn't let go. His stomach mouth unhinged, spewing acid directly onto the exposed cybernetic joint. The servos whined, the blade went slack. Kale's arm disconnected, rolling loose. He stared at the bloody stump, eyes wide with shock for a fraction of a second, the first human emotion Aris had seen on his face. Then, rage. You piece of shit. Kale launched a furious kick, catching Aris in the chest. Aris flew backward, hitting the wall with a crack. His ribs were definitely broken. He couldn't feel his right arm anymore, the one that had held the stump of tentacle. Looking down, he saw it was now a shredded mess of muscle and scale. Gone. Both arms useless. But he didn't need arms. Kale was advancing, but Aris had already won. Kale took one last stride, and stepped on the landmine that Aris had remembered from Loop 7, the one buried shallowly in the concrete debris only he had noticed. The explosion was deafening. It tore through the tunnel, a column of fire and shrapnel that lifted Kale off his feet and threw him against a piped wall. The warlord crumpled to the ground, his legs mangled, blood pooling beneath him. Silence rang in Aris's ears. He groaned, forcing himself to sit upright. His arms hung limp. He looked at the shattered mine casing, then at Kale, who was still alive, regeneration throbbing, but too slow to close the wounds fast. Kale laughed. It was a wet, broken sound, spit and blood coating his lips. Clever corpse. Landmine in the same spot after 17 loops. I would have remembered too if I had all my memories. He coughed, wincing. But it doesn't change the outcome. Aris shuffled toward him, feet scraping. What outcome? Kale turned his head, dirty eyes bleeding scarlet. The final boss. You think you're the first looper to reach them? They've killed thousands of us, every iteration, they wait at the final gate, chewing through mutants and time ghosts alike. His voice dropped to a rasp. You will be next. Your arms won't grow back enough. Your mutations belong to their stomach now. And the girl, she's just another meal. Aris stood over him, unable to feel his left index finger that had melted against the wall. He looked at Kale's nearly closed eyes, he hadn't lost conscience yet, but the explosion had popped both eardrums. Weakness flooded Aris's limbs. His mind curled into a single point of target, top district. Top district, and death. Help me, he didn't say aloud. But maybe his bones twitched enough for Mira to hear as she limped over, her leg trailing blood from a cut on her calf. Kale's head. We need it, for the key, she asked, her voice shaking. Chest maybe, Aris mumbled, collapsing onto her, weight distributed above her body. As evidence. He didn't finish. Vision static. The last thought his consciousness nurtured before falling into the dark jumble of dream fragments, the final boss, the thousands of me. Thousands of me. And Kale's laugh, still echoing. Above, the dust settled on a city that would burn eternally. The rain within the tunnel began again, a dull patter on the ceiling, and Mira shifted Aris's body toward the shaft of light that slanted from the upper street, her eyes scanning the rooftops for more soldiers that would not arrive. Not yet. But soon. The world spun around Aris in a hazy blur of pain and exhaustion. Each step Mira took sent a jolt through his broken body, his shredded right arm stump grinding against her shoulder where she had hoisted him. His left arm hung limp, the bone likely fractured in at least 3 places from Kale's final blow. Blood trickled down his side, soaking through the tattered remnants of his shirt. The acrid smell of the waste district faded as they climbed a cracked ramp that led toward the top district gate. Aris forced his eyes open, squinting against the harsh glare of the setting sun. The sky above the barrier was an unnatural violet, the same color it had been in every loop when the final confrontation drew near. 50 times he had seen that color. 50 times he had died before reaching this point. But this loop was different. This time, he had Mira. "Hold on," Mira whispered, her voice strained from the effort of carrying him. Her calf wound had stopped bleeding thanks to a crude bandage she'd torn from her sleeve, but she was limping. Still, she refused to stop. Her grit lifted something in Aris's chest, a flicker of hope amidst the agony. The gate loomed ahead, a massive slab of obsidian-like material, easily 4 meters high, etched with glowing violet runes that pulsed in a slow rhythm. The barrier shimmered around it, a translucent dome of pure energy that seemed to hum with malevolent intent. A circular indent sat at the center of the gate, just large enough for a hand or a small container. The key slot, Aris knew from his memories. But beside it, a shallow basin was carved into the stone, lined with dried brown stains, the blood of countless prior sacrifices. Mira eased him down against a shattered pillar near the gate. Aris gasped as his back hit the cold stone, the pain in his ribs spiking. He looked up at her. Sweat plastered dark strands of hair to her forehead, and her gray eyes were fixed on the gate, determination hardening her features. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aris nodded weakly. "Blood from a pure human. The barrier, it scans for mutation residue. Anyone with physical mutations, the gate rejects them. It kills them." He coughed, red spittle flying from his lips. "That's why Kale never got through. He was too far gone." Mira's hand went to her pocket, where she kept the crystal key. She had drawn her own blood earlier, back at the hospital safe house, filling a small vial they'd scavenged. But now, standing before the gate, she seemed to hesitate. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the vial and uncorked it. "And you're sure I'm a pure human?" she asked. "Mentally mutated doesn't count." "Memory absorption is a mental mutation," Aris said, his voice crackling. "The gate doesn't care about the mind. Only the body. Your body is unchanged, you can pass." She let out a shaky breath, then stepped toward the basin. The moment she tipped the vial, the blood dripped into the shallow bowl with a soft plink. The runes on the gate flared bright violet, and a deep vibration rumbled underfoot. Aris could feel the energy shifting, like a pressure change in the air. The barrier flickered, and a section of the gate groaned, splitting vertically down the middle. With a grinding sound, the two halves slid apart, revealing a pristine corridor beyond, lined with white walls and chrome fixtures. The interior of the top district looked immaculate, untouched by the apocalypse that ravaged the lower levels. Mira turned to look at Aris, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "We did it," she breathed. But Aris shook his head weakly. "You did it. I can't go." "What?" Her face twisted in confusion and anger. "No. We came here together. I'm not leaving you." "Mira," Aris said, his voice stern despite his exhaustion. "Look at me. I have no arms. My ribs feel like they're grinding together inside. I can barely breathe. I'll only slow you down. You have to go alone." "But your sister," she started. "Her name is Elise," Aris cut in. "She's in Sector 7, a safe zone at the eastern edge of the district. A nursery for pure humans run by former military doctors. She'll be there. Tell her Grimm sent you." The lie came easily. Grimm was a name from his first loop, long dead. But it was a password he knew would work. Mira's eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears. "You're not dying. You said you have a final mutation coming. You can survive." "Maybe," Aris said. "But I need to stay here. The gate recognizes blood once it's opened, it will let you exit. I'll wait until my transformation finishes, then try to follow." If I go in now, I'll be a liability. The final boss will kill me before I can react. A long moment passed. Mira clenched her fists, then reached down and squeezed his shoulder, gently, mindful of his injuries. You better not die, Aris. I still need to get answers from you. You owe me that much. He gave a faint smile. Deal. With one last glance, Mira turned and stepped through the gateway. The runes pulsed, and the slab began to slide shut, the corridor slowly sealing off the lower world. As the gap narrowed, Mira disappeared into the white light. Then the gate closed with a solid boom, leaving Aris alone except for the distant howls of mutants in the ruins behind him. He slumped against the pillar, his vision darkening at the edges. The pain was overwhelming, but he forced himself to focus, to breathe. Deep inside him, he felt a heat building, not fever, but something primal. A furnace ignited in his core. The mutations were reorganizing. A golden glow emanated from beneath his skin, starting from his chest and spreading outward. He watched in awe and terror as the light outlined his veins, the cracks in his bones. His stomach acid mouth churned, and the mutated flesh on his back writhed as if alive. The stump of his right arm began to pulsate, and tendrils of iridescent tissue coiled outward, weaving into a new shape. His left arm straightened with a sickening crack, the bone knitting itself. Aris screamed as the transformation accelerated. His eyeball railgun heated up inside his socket, causing searing pain. His rib blades expanded, pushing against his skin, threatening to burst through. The scales on his shoulder grew, merging with his clavicles. He was becoming something else. Something beyond human. The golden light flared, blinding him. He felt his consciousness expand, or perhaps contract, he couldn't tell. The world around him became a web of threads, each thread a path. He could see the fortification of the top district, the movements of guards inside, the fragile form of Mira jogging through a courtyard. And deeper, hidden from sight, he sensed the final boss, a black son of malice, waiting in the central tower. And he could see himself, no, not himself. A new shape. His body was reconstructing into a seamless amalgamation of weapons, his arm stumps became twin riffled cannons capable of firing condensed energy, his rib cage unlocked into a belt of hovering saw blades, his stomach acid now mixed with a compound that could dissolve any material. He was a living armory. Aris gasped as the transformation reached its climax. The golden light faded, leaving him in the dusty twilight. He looked down at himself. Where his hands used to be, or canoport, twin metal muzzles emerged from his forearm stumps. Strange crystal spines ran along his spine, each one throbbing with power. He still had no functional hands. But he didn't need them. He had become the ultimate weapon. A grin spread across his grimy face, cracking the dried blood on his lips. 50 loops, and I finally get a decent upgrade, he rasped. Better late than never. He pushed himself to his feet, steady despite his new limbs. The gate hummed before him, but he knew he could smash through it if needed. Power surged through his veins, hot and intoxicating. But a voice whispered in his mind, control it, or be consumed. The mutations were not done with him yet. The final boss would require everything he had. With the gate sealed behind him and Mira safe within, Aris took his first step toward the final confrontation. Whatever came next, he was ready. He had to be.